Good evening, everyone. It's Denise from Dobby Books, and today I was really inspired by a video that Jim from Great Books, Big Ideas had posted on his YouTube channel, and it was his reflection on Dr. Adam Walker's YouTube video on the decline of the English department. I am a subscriber to Adam Walker's YouTube channel. It really is very informative. He is a professor of English. His specialty is poetry, and he just has a wonderful. I just love the way he presents his information, how he talks through poetry, which is not my forte. And I was just so glad to hear that Jim also subscribes, or at least listened to Adam Walker. Earlier, I think it was probably maybe a couple of weeks ago, Adam had posted something on the loss of the humanities in the colleges, and I was absolutely saying, yes, I agree, because maybe because I'm a humanities person, this is what interests me. I see this as the foundation of civilization itself. And the English department, of course, is part of that humanities group. And I couldn't help thinking about let me give you an idea of what Adam talked about. So he talked about how over the years, especially since the 1970s, there's been really a significant decline in the English department, its curriculum, its faculty. It's become more, I believe the one word he used was corrupt, but he didn't expand on that. But I was familiar with what he was talking about. This is the fight between conservatives and liberals, academic. The conservatives say they meet with hostility when they're on a mixed campus. The conservatives are a little more traditional in their teaching of English, and they're not so much leaning towards the modern literary theories that are being used in more liberal colleges, for example. And I think hands down, all of them have said they really do meet with hostility. There are people who just will not even talk to them. They're perceived as the enemy. And I think this is extremely unfortunate. And I attended a college that's liberal, yes, but I got a good education. I love my college. I had wonderful professors, but I think that the liberal colleges have only themselves to blame for this rift that's going on in academia, especially linked to the English departments. He discussed the rise in tuition. That was more of a move, a political move, where they just sort of were not taxing those that earned more money like they used to, which really helped with education. That's why my parents could actually pay for college and come out of it debt-free. I know in the 80s when I started going to college, it was much more affordable. I still would have been able to pay for most of my college education at that point. But it's just continued to go downhill. So that, I guess that's a given. Tuition is too high. Yes, it's way too high. But if you wanted, it was a dilemma. Do you want a good education, or do you want an affordable one? What kind of a choice is that? I knew when I wanted to pursue an English major that I wanted it to lean more towards the traditional canon. I wanted to become familiar with this. This is something I didn't know about growing up, that I found out about when I was homeschooling my own children, because in the local public schools in the area that I lived in, I did not like how they were teaching my children in their early years. I didn't think they were strong on the reading skills and the math skills, the really basic stuff. I don't know where they were on that, but my children didn't know stuff in first or second grade that they should have known. So I pulled them out of school for a few years, and I taught them to read. My thing was they learned to read phonetically. So I taught them phonics, They're all strong readers. They knew their math facts, and I taught them how to use the calculator in their head, not to depend on one on their phone. Okay, so that's the end of that story. But I also knew that when I was learning about homeschooling, had become involved in the homeschooling community back then, this is when I encountered the book by Susan Weisbauer, The Well-Trained Mind. She talked about this concept of classical education, something I knew nothing about. She explained it all. She provided the lists. This is how it's done, and giving a little history on that. And I was hooked. I thought this was beautiful. This is what I wanted for myself. But when it came time for me later on, at long after the kids graduated, they had all grown up, they'd all moved out. I was more free now. Now I could go to school. But the only classical liberal arts college that I was closest to was Thomas Aquinas College, which is in Santa Paula, California. They also have a second campus. It's in Massachusetts, Northfield, Massachusetts. And they talked, when you would read, when you go onto their website, thomasaquinas.edu, I believe. I'll put the link below. They talk about how in the 1970s there were a group of acquaintances, college professors, who were lamenting this very fact that this more traditional way of teaching English was falling by the wayside. And they were concerned about the outcome. What was going to happen to future generations if they forget who they are? And they got together in the 1970s and started this college in Santa Paula, California. I don't even remember how many students were in their charter class. They are now on this beautiful campus in Santa Paula. If you're ever here, everybody, you have to see this campus. It's in a traditional California style. It's just, I go there just to look. It's just a beautiful place to be. But it's been a very successful endeavor. And they, like I have to say, this was a Catholic group of professors who got together and started this college. And in other parts of the United States, there were evangelical Christians with the same complaint who also took up the baton, and now they have these private Christian colleges that base it on the canon. When I was going to my liberal college, I remember the subject of the canon came up. And one of my college professors believed it should be Shakespeare should not be taught anymore. He viewed the Western canon as elitist, and I believe that's the mindset of a lot of these liberal professors and academics, that the canon is elitist, therefore it is bad. And I think that's contributed to this loss of the rich history and literature and poetry and you name it that we have as a Western culture. Yes, in the old days, all education was elitist. Only the rich could afford to be educated because education was not free. They had to pay for a private tutor, and they had the leisure time to do this. The working classes were too busy working and surviving. And there was this mentality, when you think of the Middle Ages, where people really believed that the class they were born into is the class that they were meant to be in. And it was your job to do the best you could and to obey the authorities. Now, this was the mindset of the Middle Ages. We can't look at it with our 21st century mind and say, oh, no, this is how it was. This is how education was separated, because this whole culture was set up like that. And over the centuries, it became a little more accessible, but it still tended to lean towards those who had money. Then the bigger changes came after World War II, I believe, where now education was going to become accessible to all. And there was that concept of a public education. And the teaching that was happening in the schools during those younger years was based on the Western canon. So a lot of kids were growing up very familiar with all these works. And mixed in with that, of course, were the Old Testament and the New Testament. So that lingo, that culture was also blended in with the Western canon. And that's what I believe Adam is talking about when people were saying, well, why do you need an English department? People are already reading these things because this was part of our culture, because we were teaching the common people reading all this stuff. But I also think that over the years, as we've distanced ourselves more and more from this, we've lost ourselves. Think about it. In going to the history of the treatment of the Native Americans here in the United States, where the children were taken and sent to these schools, they were not sent there for good reasons. They were sent there to take the Indian out of them. Their hair was cut, so they couldn't have the traditional hair. They had to wear westernized clothes. They couldn't wear their traditional clothing. They weren't allowed to speak their own language with each other. And they did this because they didn't want them to have an Indian heritage, the Indian heritage, as they called it. They wanted, the Native Americans were not seen as a worthy enough culture to survive. It was beneath the white man's culture, right? We all know that this was the objective, to get rid of the Indian culture. Therefore, you would get rid of the Indians. But how, and think about this, there was so much, the cost to these children who later became adults, they lost their identity. This causes suffering. They go back home to their tribe, who still are rich in their traditions, and their children are strangers. And I think they lost their identity because they didn't know what to be. If you don't know who you are, if you don't know where you came from, then how are you going to know who you are? And I think that same concept can be applied to the Western canon. If we are in the Western world as we are here in the United States, I think it is beneficial for us as a civilization to be familiar with our roots. Because then I think with that stronger identity, with that rich history and literature, nourishing our minds, and as Adam Walker added, also our spirit. This was the tradition, to feed the intellect and the spirit, to make that connection. I have to ask, would we be in this mess that we're in today if we had maintained that connection with the Western canon? To my mind, I think it would be a really different scenario today. I just don't think we'd be where we are today. We'd be better off. Not just because an educated public creates a better country and a better state and a better community, because we're thinking and we have something to base that thinking on, our Western canon. I also would agree with Adam that this renaissance that's coming, those of us here on Booktube, the autodidacts who are self-educating ourselves because we have that hunger to read literature, the literature of the canon, to read it deeply, to think it through, to have that education we never had. I think that Adam's suggestion of let's not go back during this Renaissance time and just go back to the old stuff. Let's create something that is a blending. So we do have our roots, our heritage, we do have that, but we're also giving ourselves that room to incorporate the new stuff. So, and I think that's exactly right, exactly right. Whereas before, it leaned towards white male authors with maybe a smattering of female authors. The canon that we would bring to the fore now would include them, but also all those diverse voices from everywhere, um, from all ethnicities and races and genders. We all have something to offer. We all are part of this Western culture. And I think that that's exactly what's happening now. Just in knowing when we do tours of our bookshelves, many of us with our classic collection, we also have in there all this new stuff, and like women in translation, or we have African American authors, Indian American authors, you name it. We've got these outstanding sources that are also a part of that heritage, which is, I think, just an awesome idea to think about. There's a note I made here. I remember Adam talking about the literary theory. Now, I remember last year I was talking about my class in literary theory, that I went into it completely confused. It made no sense to me. Now it makes, now I know why. I think the modern theories are, for lack of a better word, detached. It's like our humanity, our soul, our deep inner selves have been disconnected and put on a shelf. And now we're just looking at words on the page as if we're looking at some sort of specimen under a microscope. And that's the wrong discipline to apply to literature or poetry, in my mind, to my mind. And I think that this overemphasis, this top-heavy emphasis on this technical theory mindset was inevitable. We got distracted. We weren't focusing on this beauty, this treasure that we had. We just had to throw in, let's put this aside. Now let's look at it differently. Maybe I'm way off on this, but I get the impression it's like we were feeding ourselves junk food, when before we were having rich, clean foods before that. We were nourished before, but now we switched over to these artificial foods. And it wasn't the same result. So yeah, theory is good, and learning and trying new things is fine. But I think they sacrificed the canon for theory, and it just does not make sense. You cannot compare one to the other. And at no time in any of my English courses did any of my professors use that more traditional critique of literature. I remember quietly thinking in my mind, we keep looking at this with our 21st century mind. Is that really fair? Is that really realistic? And I never brought that up because I guess I felt a little intimidated. Maybe there was one teacher I know who was very uptight about that. She would not have taken that very well. The other one I think would have taken it more gracefully. But like I said, remember when I mentioned the hostility? I think that was part of that. Yeah. And I remember longing for something along the lines of a more traditional connection with literature, to see it from a human experience, that self-reflection. It seemed to be an overemphasis on an outer evaluation, a judgment. Yes, it was a judgment. It was sort of looking down and judging this, how they treated women, how they treated people of color, which is important to discuss, but it's not the only thing to discuss. And that was my complaint inside. I don't think we're looking at this properly. We can't look at a 18th century novel with 21st century eyes. It just didn't seem fair. I would have loved to have had the curriculum of the 1950s and that rich exposure to all that literature and the discussion that could have gone back and forth, I think I would have been able to enjoy my reading, even of contemporary books, so much better. So much better. I would have had better tools to do that, to be a better reader in general. So, in conclusion, I think universities and colleges really blew it. They missed out on a phenomenal opportunity, and all those people that they could have educated and sent out into the world to teach the next generation, those are the ones that are us, teaching ourselves and spreading the word through YouTube, BookTube. And yeah, it's definitely a renaissance. And I'm also familiar with what adjunct professors do, because one of my professors when I was in community college shared exactly the same thing. The life of an adjunct professor, I think, it's just criminal. There's no benefits. There's no job security. Obviously, no tenure. That would have been job security. You get paid by class, and there better be a minimum number of students in there. Otherwise, they drop the class and you don't get paid. And because you don't have the class to teach. That's just no way to treat a professor. It really isn't. Someone who has studied, gotten their master's degree, and done all the hard work, and this is their reward. So it's like that snowball. Everything goes downhill. So at the top, they didn't value the English curriculum anymore, and it all just started rolling downhill. And not just students were affected, but the teaching profession itself was affected. So there we go. That's my answer. I hope I wasn't too long-winded. And if anybody's got other comments or other videos you want to post, I'll also put the link to Jim's original video, so you can get some additional thoughts as well. And this will be cool if this continues on. This will be great to hear. So thanks, everybody, and I will see you in just a few days. Bye-bye.